Dearest viewers, warm welcome to this exciting online event, Responsible Design in Times of Radical Transformation. My name is Marco van Hout. I'm co-founder and creative director of Digital Society School, the hosting organization of this event, of course, with the Faculty of Digital Media and Creative Industries, of which we are proudly part of the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Today, I will be your moderator and host for today, and let's get this responsive ball rolling.
Let's get scratching.
So today, faster than ever, we are going digital, and this digital transformation is disrupting society more profoundly and for a big part positively, but concerns are growing about its effect on matters such as jobs, inequality, health, well-being, economic prosperity, security, safety, and of course this can feel really overwhelming. But we should not forget that the digital technology in itself is neutral, as our philosopher of today also mentions often. We are still the designers of the digital transformation, and this also means we are responsible for the design of the digital transformation that we want and need as a society. So in order to design for a transformation aimed at a truly sustainable and responsible society, we need to transform ourselves as a field first, and then after that as a world. We should transform our mindset, we should transform our skill set, and of course we should also transform our systems. In my opinion, it is about perception, direction, and definitely experimentation. The current events in the light of the crisis of the Coronacrisis are sharpening this vision. I'm going to give you 3 examples. First, the Prime Minister of Denmark in March 2020. She said, we can't wait for evidence. We cannot wait to be entirely sure or know what will work. We are going to make mistakes, and I am going to make mistakes. In my opinion, this is a clear change and shift in mindset towards a culture of experimentation, where small, bold steps determine outcomes for next bold steps. Well, Warren Buffett, what he did was he actually sold all his stocks in airlines, American Airlines, and this was, in my opinion, again, also a clear shift in direction. Third example, and then the last example, is let's use this standstill to introduce responsible solutions. For example, what you see now in Milan, where bike lanes are going to be introduced. In Madrid, and it is said that cities that make these responsible decisions now will actually flourish in the next decade, in 2030. Again, a clear shift in direction and towards, in my opinion, experimentation. Digital Society School, we believe in responsible design. The Faculty of Digital Media and Creative Industries believes in responsible design, and we believe in the power of community aimed at a common purpose. Our yearly Global Goals Jam, for example, is a very nice example of this, where we have a 2-day design hackathon aimed to support the sustainable development goals all around the world. This year, we will have 100 locations that will participate, over 5,000 social innovators, designers, makers, change makers, you name it. This is one of those examples, and it is with great pride that I want to introduce you today to a fantastic lineup that is, let's see, this is mirrored here next to me. We have a professor in philosophy of technology, Prof. Verbeek. We have sociologist well, he does a lot, Theo Ploeg. We have our own digital transformation designer, Olina Terzi, and we have, of course, our very own dean, Kresin, who wants to also open this session officially and introduce our main speaker. Let me switch to Frank. Frank, welcome.
Dear people, I cannot see you, but you can probably see me. I'm very happy to be here and to open this meeting about responsible design. And Marco has asked me to share a personal story of how this came into being. So this is what I'm going to do. So my name is Frank, and I'm the Dean for the Faculty of Digital Media and Creative Industries at the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. I've been so for a little bit over a year. We have about 9,000 students, 5 bachelor programs, 2 master programs, 1 associate degree, but also we are home to the Amsterdam Creative Industries Network and of course also the Digital Society School. And it's my pleasure to introduce the topic. I have a background in filmmaking and artificial intelligence, and I've tried to combine those over the past 25 years, so technology and creativity. 10 of these years, I was a research director at the Amsterdam-based Waag Society, the Institute for Art, Science and Technology, developing and critiquing technology for social innovation. There I learned that in fact everybody is or can be a designer. The often digital tools, including the internet, maker spaces, open source software, open hardware, whatever, are ubiquitous and powerful. And all it takes to change the world, at least in a small way, is to go out and do it. There's no limit to human imagination and creativity. And there's equally no limits to what a committed group of determined humans can achieve. I was active in the fields of open data, citizen science, the maker movement, brain hacking, and citizen science. And in each case, trying to open previously closed boxes of knowledge. Knowledge that was, until the advancement of the internet, most often only accessible by the specialists, the experts, companies, and well-appointed researchers. Waag Society tried and still tries to open that knowledge to the general public and see what can be done. Following the slogan of the maker movement, if you cannot open it, you don't own it. Working closely with Waag's director Marleen Sticker, I wrote the Smart Citizens Manifesto, urging people to use open source technologies, form meaningful communities, and take back the ownership of the cities they live, work, and love in. An example of this is the Making Sense project, in which citizens in Amsterdam, Barcelona, and Pristina used low-cost tools to measure the environment, analyze the data, and take appropriate action. They measured air pollution, sound pollution, the quality of the water and soil, and later even radioactivity, which helped them to understand what was going on and what needed to be done, often with astounding results. So in Amsterdam, artificial trees were planted. In Barcelona, regulations and practices regarding sound pollution changed, and in Kosovo, a law was proposed and passed to combat the dire air pollution situation. But if everybody can be a designer, and if we all wield this power, what kind of designer should we be? There's so much stuff, there's so much pollution, there's so much inequality. So how can we possibly design in a way that's beneficial to both humans and our planet? What are the underlying politics of design? What about ownership of data and capital? Where does our stuff, where do our gadgets, where does our food come from? How is it made? What about the decision making? Where is the agency in the system? So what about responsibility in design? At that time, I became the managing director of Design Lab at the University of Twente, where I met Paul Verbeek, professor of philosophy and technology. At Design Lab, students and researchers from various wide-ranging disciplines and origins come together and contribute to solving societal problems. In aging, healthcare, nutrition, sustainability, safety, and now even in the COVID-19 crisis. Its disciplines encompass the humanities, computer science and design, which is exemplified by the three scientific directors, Paul Verbeek, Marcia van der Voort and Vanessa Evers. Working with companies, governments, non-profit organizations and other universities, Design Lab is quite successful in bringing people together, understanding complex problems, reframing visions, making prototypes, and actually progressing towards sustainable solutions. Design Lab embraced the Sustainable Development Goals, and personally, I was looking for a way to bring the spirit of Waag Society and its quest for values in technology to the University of Twente, a technical university for that matter. All this, and this resolved into the concept of responsible design, a special so-called brand of design that actually thinks about the societal consequences on multiple levels, while engaging in any kind of design activity. It uses distinct tools, methods, and more importantly, a people-centered, humble mindset and a firm grounding in transdisciplinarity to design our way out of the mess, I think, that we find ourselves in. Yes, it's positivistic, but it also acknowledges the harsh realities of ownership, power, and politics from an ethical and generally philosophical standpoint. Which brings me back to my notion, my original notion, everybody is or everybody can be a designer. If that is truly the case, and I wholeheartedly believe so, then we better educate ourselves to become responsible designers. In the field of digital media and creative industries, this is potentially even more so true. And since my quest is to actually work towards positive change, where better to work than at an institute of higher education that reaches well over 9,000 students and hundreds of researchers and teachers and researchers every day. So yes, I must admit I'm on a mission to breed thousands of responsible designers that can reflect on their position and make meaningful choices for themselves and the world they live in. This is why we explore the topic of responsible design. And in a sense, this is also why we are all here today. Therefore, with a lot of pleasure, I'd like to introduce my former colleague and current friend, Peter Verbeek. I'm really honored to have him here in this Digital Society School program. For those of you that don't know him yet, there are just a few probably, here is a short biography. So Peter Paul is Distinguished Professor of Philosophy of Technology and co-director of the Design Lab of the University of Twente. He's also an honorary professor of techno-anthropology at Aalborg University, whatever that is, he'll probably tell us, Aalborg University in Denmark. His research focuses on the philosophy of human-technology relations and contributes to philosophical theory, ethical reflection, and practices of design and innovation. His widely adopted publications include Moralizing Technology, Understanding and Designing the Morality of Things, and What Things Do, Philosophical Reflections on Technology, Agency, and Design. There's no end to this list. Peter Paul is also the chairperson of the UNESCO World Commission on the Ethics of Science and Technology, currently also discussing many issues around the COVID-19 crisis. Besides that, he's an active member of several boards, such as the Dutch Council for the Humanities and the Program Council for Responsible Innovation of the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research. His work has received several awards, including a Veni, a Vidi, and a Vici, and in 2016, Peter Paul was awarded the World Technology Awards in Ethics. So needless to say, we are very proud to have Peter Paul with us, willing to share his vision on responsible design, the current events around the crisis, maybe, and of course, his insights in the philosophy of technology. Please welcome to the virtual stage, Professor Peter Paul Verbeek. Thank you for coming.
Wow. Thank you, Frank. That's an amazing introduction. And it also maybe gives a lot of expectations of the audience to what I will say. So I hope I can live up to that. And it's wonderful to see you again. We've had such a great time in the Design Lab, and I think you made the Design Lab where we are now. So we still try to work in your spirit there. So thanks for the invitation. It's wonderful to be able to give a talk in this event. Of course, it would have been even nicer to be live in Amsterdam, but then again, we would not have had so many people from all over the world who could join in. And that's maybe also a very nice angle to start this talk with. The idea of responsible innovation in times of radical transformation is very nicely illustrated by the fact that we are in a radical transformation now, brought by the virus, of course, but the digital revolution that was already taking place is suddenly taking a lot of speed. Many people have said that we live in the time of the fourth revolution, after the steam engine and the mass production and the information technology that we got. Now we live in an era of digital technologies, meaning that information technologies become physical. They merge with our everyday life world. And that's what we are facing now. Where people say that this will also lead to a new society. As I discussed many times with you, Frank, it's about well, the fifth type of society that we are shaping. Society 5.0, as people in Japan call it. So the coronavirus seems to urge us to experiment with what this society 5.0 could be. And that's maybe a very nice way to think about responsible innovation, responsible design. So what is radical about it? Radix, the origin of the word radical means root. And I think that's what we are facing now. Technology is actually at the roots of our society, the roots from which new societies can develop. So the crisis is, in that sense, for me, also really a philosophical crisis. It disrupts what's self-evident, and it forces us really to take a step back and to somehow reflect on what we really find important. The French philosopher Latour had this very nice, still has this very nice website online, where you can actually go to and fill out what you had to give up because of the virus and what you actually don't need back. The idea that, okay, this is a reset of our society, and I think that's important. But it's also a radical transformation in the sense of technology now really quite fastly has changed how we live, how we work, how we love, how we mourn the people that we have lost, maybe also how we celebrate students who get a diploma without a real life party. Harari, the historian, who also has a lot to say actually about the past and about the present and about the future, says that we are actually now engaged in a large-scale social experiment, and an experiment that brings us responsibility. We have to learn something from it. If we do not do that, then the crisis would be a crisis in vain. So what we can learn is to design technologies in a responsible way. But what can that be? Well, to give you my take on responsible design, I would like to explain how in that field and that approach that we also try to practice in our design lab, 3 fields come together. It's the ethics of design, philosophy of human technology relations, philosophy of technology, and it's the field of co-design. 3 approaches to design, to technologies, and also 3 approaches to normativity. So let me start with design ethics. This is a field that has developed quite fast over the past decades. I think it all started out as engineering ethics in the good old days. Maybe some of you in the audience still has been following a course in engineering ethics where you really had to learn about whistleblowing, about learning that people who developed the Ford Pinto actually saw that it was not a good idea to place the gas tank at the back of the car, because every time the car would be hit, there would be a big fire and an explosion, etc. Ethics was about risks, and it was about whistleblowing, teaching the engineers to take a stance. It placed ethics in opposition to technology. Ethics was some kind of a way to pull the brake, to say here is where we should stop. And I think over time that field has developed into something that is now often called value-sensitive design. A very interesting approach to design, particularly developed by Batya Friedman, Seattle, Washington, who has this interesting approach that actually when designing technologies, we should try to design values into the technologies. So then ethics is not opposed to technologies anymore, but ethics becomes part of it. And typically design is then also seen as a solution to competing values, as a way to bring together values that seem to exclude each other. Jeroen van der Hoven from Delft University here in the Netherlands really has this as the key focus of his work. So for instance, we want to use a technology of drones for crowd control. And now we have a dilemma, because we want them to make the world safer. If there is a pop concert, we don't want accidents to happen. But on the other hand, we want our privacy. How can we possibly bring the two together? Well, design can maybe solve the problem, make sure that we do make images, but give them such a low resolution that we can count the people, but we cannot identify who the people are. A design solution to solve an ethical dilemma. An interesting idea, and also a fruitful idea, which has inspired many designers to do ethics while designing. Not to see ethics as something outside design, but to see ethics as something that's part of design. Still, there are lessons to be learned, I think, here, because this approach to ethics of design, to my taste, sometimes instrumentalizes technology too much. It's as if you can just insert a value into a technology, and then the technology will do the thing that you wanted it to do. And in doing so, it seems to downplay a bit that people typically also reinterpret technologies. They incorporate them in their daily lives. They start to do different things with it than the designers thought that they would do. And that even can go so far that technologies sometimes also affect the very ethical frameworks with which we evaluate the technology themselves. Values are not static, they're dynamic. And this dynamism is often induced by technologies themselves. In our own department, Olina, who now works in Delft actually, has done a very interesting study on digital technologies and how they affect values, like Google Glass. If you investigate how people study or discuss Google Glass online, and you see how the technology itself affects the definition that people make of the concept of privacy. How they measure the impact of technology is not independent from the technology itself. So if you want to do value-sensitive design, you have to take that value dynamism into account. And that's where the second ingredient of responsible design comes in. Beside design ethics, I said the second ingredient was the philosophy of human technology relations, which is basically the field that I'm working in, and from which I try to do a lot of other things. And the key idea, I think, of that field is that technology should be seen as a mediator. as a part of the relations that humans have with their world. Technologies are never neutral. They are not a tool. Of course, they are also a tool, but as soon as you use them as a tool, they start to influence how you deal with them, how you deal with the world when you use them, how you see other people, how you behave, how you interpret the world around you, how you experience the world around you. So technologies are not neutral, and they're also not oppressing us. They are just like the air that we inhale or the language that we speak. They are the media with which we live, and the media are not neutral. They help to shape who we are. They help to shape what the world means for us, up to the point of shaping our value frameworks. So that notion of technological mediation, I think, can play an important role in the idea of responsible design. Maybe to make a shortcut, there are three ways in which mediation makes design something ethical. First of all these mediations of technologies, all these implications of technologies for people's behavior, people's interpretation of frameworks, can be evaluated ethically, of course. It's kind of an impact of technology that you can evaluate ethically. That's the basic way in which any ethicist would evaluate the technology. But one layer deeper, by mediating our relationship with the world, technologies also shape how humans do ethics. As soon as you introduce ultrasound in society, you become responsible for getting a child with Down syndrome, and therefore it informs the choices that you make when you expect a child. You make the choice together with the ultrasound devices, as it were. It's still your choice, but you make different choices when you make them mediated by technology. So our moral agency, to use a very philosophical word, is also mediated by technologies. And then third, also the value frameworks with which we enacted agency. Just as the example that I gave about Google Glass and privacy, also the value frameworks with which we do ethics are mediated by technologies. So there's an intricate relation between technology and ethics, much more intricate than saying that we can just design a value into a technology. The values themselves change through technology. And that urges us, I think, to introduce that third element in responsible design. Beside design ethics, philosophy of technology, it's co-design. And co-design, of course, is not new at all. But the ideas behind co-design are starting to become very influential in many other realms of our society, especially in what now has come to be called citizen science. Co-design has as its core idea that when you want to design something really well, you cannot just think that you as a designer are the expert and you know what people want. You have to engage people in the design process in order to know what they really want, because they are perfectly able to explain that themselves. And if you don't, then actually you miss a lot of opportunities to, well, make sure that you have a good connection with the users. And there are many ways in which that idea of co-design has taken shape. I mean, sometimes it's really a marketing instrument, making a connection to the market, or a basis for usability, making sure that people understand what you want to do. But I think deep down, it's a democratization movement. It's a movement that is an answer to the hegemony of the experts. Experts are important, but experts are not gods. And designers actually should learn, and are learning rapidly. Maybe they're the first who have learned that actually, that expertise does not mean that you explain all your wisdom to the stupid people, but that you use your wisdom to engage all these people. And I think citizen science is doing exactly that. It's not science communication explaining to the people that they're stupid if they don't understand, that the vaccine will not make you autistic. It's trying to understand what people's concerns are, to engage them in doing research, to engage them in data collection, or even in asking the relevant questions. So I think the next step would be citizen ethics. Why would ethicists be the ethical experts? Why should we think of design ethics as a professional field where you have to engage an ethicist in the design process in order to do that ethically? Of course, I don't want to say that we don't need ethicists, but the role of ethicists should not be the role of the ethical expert telling people what to do. It should be the role of the facilitator of ethical reflection. And it's very interesting then to see that indeed, if you introduce these ideas of co-design, you have this perfect mix, I think, of ideas about ethical design, ideas about human-technology relations, and ideas about engaging the public. And in the design approach that we are working with in the design lab, we also try to integrate them all into one total methodology, which is basically also a way of design thinking. Of course, design thinking is also something that maybe is starting sometimes to come a little bit obsolete, or at least I think we need an update of it. So I think one of the update possibilities that there are are to integrate these three elements that I just gave in design thinking. And in the design lab, we actually have now reduced it to three basic steps that you make. The first step is explain and explore. If there is a design challenge, you first have to try to explain the challenge and to explore the whole field. And in doing that, it's important to focus on the interaction between technology and society. How does technology shape a societal issue? How could technology help to solve a societal issue? So this is really important to do. And well, explaining and exploring is a way also to force you to think about the interaction between technology and society, or users and technologies. Then the second step would be imagine and ideate. Try to imagine the potential implications of an ideated idea. You have an ideation, you have a potential solution, try to get in touch with the future implications. And for that, you need ideas about human-technology interactions, about mediation, about human-technology relations. You also need ideas about the ethical impact, about the value frameworks with which you could evaluate whether or not this would be a good, acceptable, helpful solution. And then the last step is reflect and reframe, where it invites you also to reframe the problem that you have. And where in the second step, it's typically about understanding how technology affects society. Now you can again try to ask yourself, okay, what kind of society would come from this, and how can we, from this societal concern, rethink the technology that we have developed and then start a new cycle. And of course, this is not an algorithm, but it can help. It's a way to integrate various fields into an approach to design that can maybe be helpful to design in a responsible way. So let me, as the final part of this talk, then connect that to COVID-19 and to ways in which we could deal responsibly with the crisis, and also with ways to design ourselves out of the crisis. As Frank already said when he introduced me, I'm also the chairperson of a worldwide commission for the ethics of science and technology at UNESCO. It's actually one of the two ethics commissions that exist at UNESCO. The other ethics commission is about bioethics. And together with that, we wrote a statement already in the first week or the second week of the lockdown to ask attention for ethical dimensions of the crisis that should not be forgotten, and they can help maybe also to inspire what responsible design could be. Basically, if I would need to summarize that statement, it says three important things. First is, policy should always be based on science, on scientific insights, but never on science alone. It should always also be based on ethics. We should not only let the doctors rule the world, even though they're really important and would be really not a good idea not to ask their advice. But there's much more at stake than only survival of people. It's about the entire society. And that's the second point. There are new groups of vulnerable people coming about because of the crisis. Also the people who are confined to their homes. There is domestic violence. There is kids who actually get a huge backlog at school. There are people who suffer from loneliness. So there are a lot of issues that we need to solve. It's not only that. And third, there is a global dimension to this. It requires international solidarity to deal with the crisis. We can never just stick to our own interests, our own ventilators, our own economy. It's a matter of international solidarity. So that's maybe an important first thing to say. And I think that global dimension is really a theme also in that fourth revolution that we are in. And the current debate about artificial intelligence is also typically, I think, ignoring the global dimensions that are at stake. It's often framed as a race between China and the US, and then the EU should have the third way. Between radical capitalism and radical centralism, we should have democratic AI. And of course, I'm all in favor of democratic AI, but the problem of the story is that the whole southern part of the world is not even on the map. And it has a lot of implications there as well. It has a lot of implications for cultural diversity, for small languages. The infrastructure needs to be there to be part of this world. So there are many more issues than well, the issues that are on the table there. So to give one example in the, I think, 2 or 3 minutes that I still have, let me say a few words about one of the technologies that's currently in the picture to design us out of the crisis, and that is the tracing apps that are being developed to help us out of the lockdown, at least. For me, it has been a very interesting experience to have been a member of the expert group that was in the appathon that was organized, so an app marathon, organized by the Ministry of Health to test 7 ideas for apps that could actually track people who are infected and trace people who have been in contact with them to give you a notification to make sure that, so if you run a risk to be infected as well, that you can put yourself in a form of quarantine and you make sure that you don't infect other people. It's a very contested thing. And the Appathon actually was a very interesting thing to do. Also for me, quite an experience, because it was also contested to be a member of the panel. Some ethicists said to us that we were whitewashing the very idea. We should not do this at all, right? So if you take part in it as an ethicist, then yeah, you're actually selling your soul to the ministry, and that's what you. So this is really an approach to ethics that I want to oppose. I think as soon as you turn your back to us, the kind of development, then you give up the possibilities to take responsibility. The beauty of this was that actually the outcome of the Appathon was that there was not a good app yet. We should just not do this. And people who thought that they were doing ethics on Twitter complaining about the people in the Appathon just did not see that the whole Appathon was full of ethics. It was only about ethics. All the designers were doing ethics. It was only about how can we make sure that it's safe and reliable, privacy is secure, what kind of solutions do we have to take all these concerns of people into account. And I think what came from this, and I don't have time to go through the cycle of responsible design, but I think it's important to focus on the reflect and reframe part. So after the ideations that were there, which I then see as the 7 ideas that we had, the reflection and reframing came down to the idea, actually, what is the problem that we wanted to solve in the first place? Do we want to see this as a digital vaccine that could free us from a lockdown? But that would actually result in quite a totalitarian system, where you might have to show your phone, and if you have a red screen, then you should stay home. If a green screen, you can go to your work or to the supermarket. That's maybe not the kind of society that we want. Or should it be actually not about surveillance, but about solidarity? So should we design a behavior support tool that helps you to take responsibility for the other people around you, for yourself? And that results in a completely different idea what the app could be, what kind of functionality it should have. So by starting to design, I think we discovered that there is a lot of ethical values at stake, that this is not just a neutral tracing tool. We reorganize society, reorganize politics, the relations between the government and citizens, etc. We have to take all of that into account in order to design these apps in a responsible way. Of course, this is not the only issue to be solved by far in the crisis that we are in now. I mean, people who feel lonely, people who have lost people who cannot even go to their funerals. I think this is all much more severe, maybe, or much more severe. It's very severe. So there are many, many things that urge us to rethink this digitalization, and also to get in touch maybe more with the societal and also the existential implications of digitalization. So this was just one of the examples, and also a way I hope to introduce a little bit about how I see responsible design. And I look forward to the discussions with the other speakers to dive more deeply into the nitty-gritty details of this all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter Paul, for this very interesting perspective, and also Frank for introducing Peter Paul and the session. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker. She is a research and design professional, passionate for the interaction of people, cities, and technologies. Her background is in urban research and design, and she is a methodic and creative problem solver with a knack for systemic thinking and an eye for the broader image. At the moment, she focuses on how the digital transformation can work for society, and at Digital Society School, she is a digital transformation designer. She is Olina Terzi. I would like to welcome her to the stage, and before I do that, I would like to ask your questions already in the Q&A chat, so I can start collecting them and have a look, and also try to already mention for whom the question is. Thank you so much. Olina, the stage is going to be yours.
Hi, everyone. Hello, thank you, Marco, for the introduction. I must say it's interesting to give this presentation without an audience, but I'll try to do my best here. I'll share my screen to show you. So thanks again, Marco, for the introduction. I will try to bring a perspective of what we do at the Digital Society School, and My role is called Digital Transformation Designer. And this is exactly what I will try to explain to you, how we see the relation between digital transformation and design. And the way we try to do applied research on this topic is by having industry partners, which use us as an outsourced R&D department to conduct research on how they can innovate on their processes and organizational structures. So we are a more hands-on team trying to see what digital transformation really means in the front line. As it has been mentioned before, we are undergoing immense changes in our society, how we relate to technology, how we leverage, but also how it can be weaponized at the same time. But what I think is very important to realize is that this is a digital experiment that was not based on our voluntary shifts in culture or voluntary choice. This situation is by emergency. And what we see arising is a crisis management mentality, which I think is very important to be distinguished by the real digital transformation mentality that we should be following. And the difference is very simple, that in the crisis management mentality, you try to implement changes with a hope that things will get back to normal as soon as possible. But what digital transformation is trying to do is to have long-term changes that are, of course, ethical, and the questions here are much deeper. So, of course, there are dangers, there are risks, and all this conversation is very needed, of course. But at the same time, we should be aware that this is a first step towards it. So we are entering this global experiment, the testing ground. You could argue that is uneven because of the crisis, but at the same time, a very important first step has been taking place, which is the digitalization of services, the ways we work, the ways we learn. So this first step can be harnessed towards what we see as digital transformation in the field of business and academia. Specifically, this term causes a lot of either confusion or fear to business leaders, according to expert consultants in the field, because every company that needs to stay relevant in the digital era is facing a different challenge within this this transformational climate. So no one has really the answer because very simply there is no one correct answer, and everyone is seeing a different part of this big monster that we are trying to respond to, but no one has this real one-fits-all answer to it. So that is what is causing what academia is calling a digital transformation fatigue, really. At the same time, there are some things that industry leaders have in common. They understand that as soon as you put a technology between the service provider and the service user, you start exactly to see them instead of clients as users. So you are trying to create this mediator, this interface that will have them as the center. And we see very often that departments like branding, marketing, and sales are very easily and very fast impacted by changes, how to harvest data, what kind of platforms to use. So this is something that we agree on. But let me give you an example of a company in the pro-digital era that faced a very big challenge in how it can transform to the new situation. And that is Kodak. Kodak was an industry leader in the 1820s when it was founded, and it was the creator of the film and a series of innovative cameras that really democratized photography to the masses. Now, although their there were a series of innovations that Kodak was responsible for, something really changed in the 1975 when Kodak was the inventor of the digital camera. So there was an engineer at Kodak which came up with this invention, and when they presented this camera to senior leadership, the actual technology was hidden in the closet, as many have mentioned, because the engineer was not allowed to create purchasable products of this new technology, because what it would cause would be a cannibalization of the industry of film. Basically, Kodak chose to stay blind to this new technology that it had invented in order to save its core business. Now, this is normal from one respect. From another respect, it really kept them back from what digital could offer. And for those who don't know the history of it, Kodak went bankrupt in 2012. So what can this tell us about digital transformation? We see that this is actually just the user centricity part of it was just the tip of the iceberg. Digital can change fundamentally a business. And in the case of Kodak, it meant the business model would have to change entirely. The industry would change. And that, in order to make that shift, there has to be an underlying leadership, culture, and many other things that go to the very core of the business itself. So Kodak really had the tools to transform. So it had the technology, it sold so many patents on digital technology, and it had the process. It actually had one of the biggest R&D departments based in Rochester, New York. But what it didn't have was the mentality, the mindset for change. And this is exactly where we see the culture of design could come in. And that's what we refer to digital transformation design, because we think there are some people that are very familiar with this trial and error mentality, with this experimentation, with this iteration, and are very comfortable to build on ideas and are much more resilient to change. And these are the people, like engineers, like designers, who are responsible for creating new things, coming up with new inventions. And this discovery-driven mentality is what we think that our partners, our industry partners, should adopt. And this is what we try to do for them with our projects and our teams working for their experimentation processes. So we see that innovation, we understand that innovation is not a linear process. There's no start and end, and that's not easy. There are ups and downs. It's a rocky road, and only through iterations you can get to progress. And once you start to redefine your success, instead of measuring it in return on investments, for example, but measuring it in terms of your learning, then success is really redefined and innovation can really bloom within a company. So that is what we try to do at DSS. We try to redefine also being an innovation startup within a university, which is traditionally the owner of democratizing learning. We try to see what this means for universities and for learning in the future, because a learning mindset is something you don't get educated on like a hard skill. But what we want to do is to really stress the importance of that. But let's go a bit back to the Kodak example and see what this resilience would mean, because indeed there was this decrease of analog cameras due to digital cameras, and Kodak at the time had 10 years to think about it. But the next big trend in the industry was that of smartphones, and the rate of change and the time you have these days to adapt to change is much less. So how do you build this digital resilience? And our answer is by having this learning mindset that can update your skills both as a business but also as a professional, because we don't have so much time yet. And the fun fact of the whole story is that Kodak, although its business was cannibalized by the digital, by smartphones, was also the inventors of the first camera to share pictures online. So they were again innovating on their own industry. They came up with the social dimension of photography 3 years before even Facebook was invented, with this easy share Kodak camera, which could access, anyone with an internet connection could access your photos online on a web browser. What happened to Kodak? Although being an inventor for the second time and innovating on their product, is that they use this social platform to make people print more photos. So what Kodak did was to try to reinforce and stay completely stagnant to its core business model. It did not go down to the lower tip of the iceberg. It stayed innovative, it stayed experimental, but it didn't have the leadership to respond to these really deep changes that were needed. Okay, the core takeaway from this story is that Kodak never reached that lower tip of the iceberg, and it had the chance to do it more than once, and that was what the leadership failed to do. So to avoid such problems in the future, what we are trying to build and what we train our teams at the Digital Society School is digital transformation designers, and we are trying to build up this profile of a professional who is ready to face this fast-changing world from now on. So there are 3 core values or principles that we are trying to build into the designers of the future. The first one is people that are embracing productive failure. So this culture of experimentation and iteration has an inherent embrace of failing. We learn to embrace it and learn from it rather than try to hide it. And that helps in navigating these uncertain times, and ultimately brings us closer to the real innovation. The second value is people that are trying to break down those silos. And these silos could be between departments of organizations, but also within teams. So we train people within multidisciplinary teams, cross-functional teams, and we bring people together from different backgrounds, cultural and professional. And we try to observe these dynamics and fine-tune these connections so that we enable creative collaboration between them. And lastly, we try to infuse this mentality into people of lifelong learning, because when the industry is constantly changing, you cannot avoid to change yourself accordingly. And in order to change yourself, you have to be passionate for learning and reinventing yourself to fit the needs of the future. So you might ask that, how does this relate to responsible design? But this is exactly what we see is the responsibility of the designers for this era. And you might be thinking of who can be this digital transformation designer. Is it an engineer, a designer only? Is it a business analyst? Who is it? But I would like to close this talk by reversing the question and actually asking who isn't responsible for it? Who isn't responsible for shaping this technology that will lead our society from now on? I would like to continue this discussion with all the other speakers, and I really look forward to these interesting give and takes in this.
Thank you so much, Olina. Some questions are rolling in, so this is exciting. Please keep them coming. Later we will address them. We are now going to try to connect our earthly beings with Theo Ploeg, who is somewhere in the virtual space. I'm going to see if I can share his view. Our next speaker, and he's a speculative design aficionado, design and media socialist. He tells stories of possible futures that we should apply in the now. And he he learns, he teaches, he trains, he talks, he writes, everything on the edges of speculative design, media and journalism, believes in swarms. Please swarm with him, and please welcome to the stage, Theo Ploeg.
So, well, I'm Theo, you didn't hear that, I think, but thanks, Marco, for the invitation. Before I dive into speculative design, I want to zoom out a little bit and go back to 1985 to the Live Aid event. I was back then 16, so I wasn't really interested in the background of the event. I was only interested in. But the interesting thing was that it was such a big event broadcasted around the world, and millions of people saw it and thought, okay, this is so big, we are going to solve hunger in the world. And of course, we all know that didn't happen. If you look at figures of 2017, it's even kind of clear that the people that are undernourished are doubled since the 1980s. So the problem only got worse. And that's, of course, not kind of a message we want to hear. If we see how we kind of perceive the world at the moment, it's like we are thinking our world's accelerating and we don't have control, like it's going really fast. And of course, besides hunger, there are a lot of other problems that we face. Challenges, you can also call them that, because that's kind of a nicer word than a problem. So we have, of course, the plastic waste, we have climate change, we have refugee crisis. So I can, of course, go on and on. We also have the Coronacrisis at the moment. But we kind of are in a situation that we are trying to get control, but we don't have control. And I think that's one of the kind of the main issues at the moment, that we are always seeking for control, kind of that modernistic approach to solving problems. I think if we look at pop culture, we can maybe have kind of a different perspective on how to face those challenges. And I think one of the most interesting, iconic even movies is this one. And it's based on a graphic novel, a French graphic novel back from the 80s. And it is a story about a world that is kind of plunged into an enormous effect of the climate change, where the world became kind of uninhabitable because the temperatures dropped, and the only remaining people are living in this train. And this train is going around the world in circles and circles, and has done that for almost kind of 80 or 90 years. So the people that are at the moment in the train didn't experience the world as it once was. And those people think that the train is their life, that is kind of their reality, and they aren't kind of capable of looking outside of the train. So the only thing that is happening in the train is that the people are trying to set up a system that makes the train as it is function, with all kinds of its good things, its flaws, with the caste system, etc., etc. So I think this story shows us that remaining in the train and only looking at the inside of the train doesn't solve the problem. At the end of the movie, the train will also derail. About the Baroque sunburst by Frederick Jameson, famous sociologist, who says that we need more kind of rays of light that kind of infiltrate our current reality to show us that there is something besides our reality, that there are other realities, that there is kind of another world, that there is a thinkable other world, but also a practical other world. And I think that designers, but everybody that's kind of working on doing stuff, has to be kind of aware that the creation of Baroque sunburst is really important. And I think that in the design scene, there is kind of the last couple of years, a more or less kind of emergence of the ethical idea of what design is. So a lot of designers are playing guilty, are saying, okay, what I did, for example, this is the designer of the retreat, said, okay, what I designed is really bad, and I shouldn't design it. And of course, it's the same with the designer of the Eternal Scroll. So he also pleads guilty in the Netflix documentary Abstract, where he says, okay, at the time, 2010, I thought this would really solve the problem of people constantly clicking next page on the internet. So I really thought about kind of making it easier for people. But in the end, it turned out that I kind of created, well, his words, a monster that made us kind of addicted to the internet, because we now always think that the next thing we would see in the slide is even better than what we've already seen. I don't think he's really guilty, but I think it's a good thing that he's kind of thinking about the consequences of what he did. Back in the 1990s, Dick Buchanan already came with this for Audit of Design, where he already kind of outlined that design is not only the product or the service, of course, but that it's also the interactions and the services and the behavior that comes with the products you design, but that there is also another level, namely the system level, that designs are not only kind of changing our behavior, but designs are also changing the way our system functions and what we think as a society is important. And I think that's kind of an insight that is already quite old, but kind of recently is reintroduced into the design world, so that we can see this also as design. So this is design on the macro level, on the system level. Most people that kind of invented this or make this product have not the intention to kind of make a plastic soup, but in the end, it's the consequence. So I kind of took the model of Dick Buchanan and made it a bit easier, but it's mostly because I like the figure 3. So I kind of divided the level, the artifact level, the service or product, the behavior level, the impact on the system that it creates. So it's interesting to know that the systematic level for me is in the behavioral part, and then the transformation level. So the effects of what you are making, what you are doing, and also the way it changes our value system. Because I think that's the most important part in this. So people that know Marshall McLuhan already, I think, thought, okay, but it's what Marshall McLuhan means with the medium is a message, and I think that's a fair point. So if we kind of understand that every medium, every technology, everything we design has a message, and the message in this way is, of course, that what it changes in society itself, then there's much more kind of leverage to understand what the impact of the design that they are making is. So that's design, which is kind of not that old. Anthony Dunn and Fiona Radby wrote this book, Speculative Everything. They were, of course, already kind of famous after critical design, but I think speculative design is really in line with the things I've already said. So speculative design is much more kind of a way to debate what the implications are of the things you are doing. And it's much self maybe, but focused on the idea that if we as designers design in a specific way, we will also design artifacts, services, things that will fuel discussion about the future, about what futures we want to have, instead of just kind of waiting till the future happens. So you could say that if you look at this future cone, speculative design is much more in the preferable part. So it kind of asks designers to think in a different way, to think in a way what should happen, but also what could happen, instead of what a lot of scenario thinkers, for example, do, or a lot of future thinkers, is the projected future or the future that is likely to happen. So in that speculative design is much more kind of, well, yeah, speculative, of course, but it's also much more open and leaves much more different realities available in the future. And you can also see this in this brilliant mapping, where you see that speculative design is in the right corner below. The transformational design is the most important thing. So it's a really big kind of change from the situation we already have. And it's also, and I think that's kind of the link with the values, it's non-normative. So it's not the case that a designer really starts off with a specific set of values in a way, okay, I want my design to be this and this and this because I think the world should be this, but much more open, much more, okay, I'm going to explore this. And maybe my value system will change with the results I'm finding. So I think that speculative design is not only kind of aiming for a discussion, and it's not only aiming for maybe a product, but it's also aiming for a kind of a reinterpretation of the value system we currently have. And also as a designer, your own current value system. An example to kind of distinct maybe design thinking or more kind of old-fashioned ways of designing to speculative design. This is an electric car, and that's kind of much more an example of design thinking because it relates to the reality we already have, because we already have cars. And it's quite easy. Well, it's not easy, of course, but it's easier to take something we already have, the car, for example, and then turn it into something that is more sustainable. While you can also think in totally different ways. Think, okay, if we are talking about sustainability, we are not talking about, for example, the car or just the transportation we already have, but we are thinking of totally new ways of transportation. So this is the definition we use at Speculative Futures Amsterdam. It's different from the rubber and done definition because it's maybe much more sociological. That's kind of because I'm a sociologist. That's, I think, the main reason. So for us, speculative design is an attitude, and we also want to introduce it into the standard design process. So we don't want speculative design to be something that is for the galleries or for artists or for a really small group. So it really needs to be introduced in the design process. And the idea is that designers are much more thinking in environments, creating new worlds, also new artifacts. So we want to get the designer out of the train and creating a new environment, where maybe the train is also a part of the environment, but the values and the behavior is different. Two examples of projects that I think are in line with the definition we have is this project by Van Kolkman, Open Surgery. This do-it-yourself surgical robot is this graduation project at the Royal Academy of Arts. And he was thinking about the health system and the health system becoming too expensive for a lot of people. So in the end, he invented a surgical robot that is quite cheap and that people could buy themselves, so they can do it-yourself surgeries on themselves instead of going to the hospital. Of course, it's a working prototype that fuels a discussion about the future of our health system. Oh, another one is this project by Anastie Eggers and Anthony Ruder, Going Cow. Turned around the whole idea of the milk industry, where they made the cow the entrepreneur. So the cow is situated somewhere in a park, and the cow brings people via an app to her herself to buy the milk, and she also gets the money. So you could say that the cow herself becomes the entrepreneur instead of the other way around. Of course, this will not function in practice, but it's, I think, a real good project to fuel the discussion about what to do with the milk industry. So I want to leave you with this design action. I think that designers and artists should much more question and our value system. And I think it's also really important that we don't leave it to scientists, politicians, philosophers, economists, etc. But we also leave it to people that use their imagination to come up with totally new ways of thinking. The Baroque sunbursts that as rays of light come into our reality at the moment and show us how the world also can be. And I think the thing is to leave the train. Thank you very much, and back to Marco.
Thank you so much, Theo. we had a lot of bumps in the road of this digital road. I'm going to switch to my view for a second.
Okay.
But perhaps it's good to start with a question for you. There was a question about a reference on the 3M's perspective on design along with the diagram. Yeah. Can you give a reference on that?
The reference. So it's kind of based on the model by Dick Buchanan, the 4 orders of design. And the idea of the model is that designers much more thinking to the micro level, so much more think about the societal and value level.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question for Peter Paul. Peter Paul, responsible design should be designed towards a new society. The issue is that each culture have a different view on what right is. Can you to that? How do we take into account culture and differences between different types of people?
Yeah, beautiful question. I think this has 2 types of answers. So one is, I think design should respect cultural diversity. So that's really what I learned by being engaged at in the work of UNESCO. There is not one single culture that we could serve. But I think in order to respect cultural diversity, we also need some basis for that respect. And of course, in the UN context, that's often the Declaration of Human Rights, which can be really extremely helpful. So if you also see that on the basis of that declaration, the Sustainable Development Goals have been formulated for now, which are all about flourishing, positive ethics, enabling people to live a good life in their own way, but also making sure that there is a basis for doing that. And I think those 2 dimensions are needed. Respect for diversity on the basis of the need to also show that respect.
Thank you, Peter Paul. Anybody else wants to respond to that? Because perhaps, Frank, do you have your vision on this from perhaps our own faculty perspective?
No, well, it's clear that that there is no set truth that you want to funnel everybody in. So the space for discussion and co-creation is needed, but that would also mean that different outcomes come from different groups. And you cannot solve this from design alone, because this is politics. And I think politics in general, on a national and international and World Health Organization basis, means that not everybody will come to the same conclusions at all times. And still, we need to have this like functioning world society in which we co-create and also cohabitate to be able to solve our big problems, including pollution, but also like safety and power and viruses and terrorism. So I feel that this is not design alone. But what I do hope is that citizen science and also designers and ethicists will inspire politicians and in the end all of us to make better ways of deliberation possible, and then come to conclusions that are locally valid, but also make sense when you put them all together. And this is not a light task, I can say. It's something that needs a lot of thought and a lot of practice.
Thank you. I have a question here for Professor Verbeek by Craig Campbell. You can see it on the right. Responsible design demonstrates tangible benefits for society and all life on Earth. Is a good basis for a responsible design direction? And do you have a better description of what it must encompass?
Wow. I'm looking for the question that I can see on the right. Because I missed the first part of what you said. Oh yeah, now I see it. Demonstrate tangible benefits for society and all life on Earth is a good basis for a responsible design direction. Maybe you have a better, wow. Okay, tangible benefits for society and all life on Earth. I'm not sure if I would formulate it like that. If I have ever done that, I don't know which context, but the word benefit sounds too economic to me, to be honest. So for me, it would all be about well-being and flourishing. And I think a good basis for responsible design for me has always been the idea of, you could say something like positive ethics. So seeing ethics not only as setting the limits of what we should not do, but ethics as the basis for creating the conditions for a good life. And of course, there is not one single answer to the question of what a good life is. That's actually one of the things that is very important in a democratic society, that we have multiple answers to that, and that we give each other the room to live our own visions of the good life, respecting each other. So, and well, maybe to add to that, if you formulate it like this, it can easily become kind of a liberal Western story about me, myself, and I. And I think that's also what you can learn from engaging in a society like the one of UNESCO, that this is really a very small part of the Earth that thinks that individual freedom and autonomy, privacy are the most important things on Earth. I think many other cultures are really revolving around solidarity and the community. And I think both elements are really important. There's no point in being an individual if you're not a member of society, and there's no society without individuals. But somewhere in these two poles, we need to find a way to live a good life. Sounds like a sermon.
You are a good preacher, Peter Paul. I have a question here from Jorge for Olina. What is the difference between digital transformation and digitization? And how can companies separate the digital transformation from technological transformation? This is for you, Olina.
I think that the moment you see an added value to your organization with the use of technology, something that it brings that it wasn't there, or something that would be a loss if that technology wasn't leveraged, I think that's the key point where you can understand whether it's adding something or it's just a medium. And in the case that it's a medium, then you are not really transforming anything. You are just translating it to use technology in some way. But that might be opening up a big question on ethics around it, and you might be just touching the surface of what is possible. So I would say the difference is really whether it's creating something new, because otherwise there's an expiry date in every kind of service, every kind of process, as the example from Kodak shows. They could be just digitalizing their services, but they maybe could have survived the first crisis, but then the second one and the third one, at some point, they wouldn't be able to survive anymore.
Thank you, Olina. I have another question from Cedric. For Frank, if everyone is a designer, what is your perspective on people who do not have access to education? Because your mission is to educate.
Yeah, that's thank you very much for this wonderful question, because this is a big plea for education in general. So I think that we should take education even much more seriously than we're currently doing. Fortunately, we have a system that is, although the crisis is doing its best to suppress it, we are resilient and we try to make it happen. But I do think that universal education, where both design, the design aspect, the technology, the reflection on technology, but also the ethical part, the morality, the agency, and also responsibilities part of the curriculum, is something that everybody should somehow meekrijgen, how do you say that, should be acquainted with during his education. And I do think that we should put much more effort in this kind of education. So not only learn people how to write, not only how to learn people how to read, but also how to reflect. And I think that this is just, we take this as a given, but it's not a given. So we should put that much more, this reflective aspect, much more in education for all of our students. And then again, I do agree and admit that, especially on the global scale, there's so many people that are out of this educational system. And I think we should bring them in as soon as possible. And I don't have the answer yet of how to do that, but I think we should unite. And I hope UNESCO can play a role.
I already see you're forging collaborations right on the spot.
That's what we do.
Very good. This is nice because this is a question for all of you. Obviously, by someone who wants to remain anonymous, so it's probably a personal question. I wonder how every speaker is handling this quarantine situation with COVID-19 personally. Curious to hear what kinds of changes, mood swings, challenges you got through. So perhaps, Theo, it was so hard to connect with you. Do you want to start with that question?
Oh, yeah, sure. If you can hear me, of course.
Yes, we hear you. We don't see you, but we hear
cool.
you.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's quite tough. I mean, I'm in Zoom meetings like kind of 8 hours each day, and I'm kind of so fed up with this situation. But on the other hand, it also kind of shows the resilience of society, and especially of the kind of more creative people. It's quite easy to connect with everybody. And I think that's one of the benefits of the situation. Although I also have kind of days where I think, okay, maybe I should kind of stay in my bed because it will be kind of a long Zoom meeting today. But I think, especially now in the Netherlands, where the lockdown is kind of more or less over, I think we've learned a lot of this situation, and I hope also that we kind of implement in education a lot of things that we've learned, and that we don't need to always go to a specific location to do, for example, education, but that we can also, especially the instructions and the theory, we can do that online so that students can get to the most important kind of insights from all over the world. So it's also a way to kind of open up education to everybody in the world. So maybe that also solves kind of the problem of the kind of restrictions that education at the moment has.
Thank you, Theo. Frank, what is your personal travel,
I think a really personal part is that I feel that it's easy. Yeah, it's here. So it's kind of easy, I think, to stay connected to the people that I already know. And I have to put more effort in that because I have to reach out. There's not this like, we don't have the coffee machine moment or whatever, walking around the campus moment or walking around the street. Well, the street maybe, yes. But for me, it's relatively simple to stay connected. But I do feel it's much harder to get new connections and to deepen those connections. So I think that to be able to deepen connections, you really need also the physical space and to be close and to drink a beer. Well, I can drink a beer, but on my own. That's not what I really mean. I have a family. We are 5 of us. Well, it's stepchildren, so a little bit complicated, but this also means that there is space for everybody to breathe. So it's going quite well. And I do feel most for the people that don't have these networks. So that's what I see also within my own sphere. So some people are well connected, they survive. Some people are not so much connected, and then I feel with them, and I feel also responsibility to reach out even a little bit more. I don't know always how to do that, so this is probably the worst thing. And as to what Theo said, I 100% agree that this is a very exciting time. So it wakes me, I think we have to read it. Now is the reason to redefine what, in my case, education means. So this is very good. And also it's tiring. So I'm really glad it's at the end of the evening. I only have one more meeting after this, and then I'll just drop off. And I hope everybody will do that. And I will do that for about 3 days. Looking forward to that.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, I also want to tell everybody that we're going to close almost because of the technicalities. We are running a little bit late, but of course we want to hear Olina as well and Peter Paul. Olina, how is this journey for you? How is the COVID crisis influencing your day, your life, etc.?
I think the key word in the question is mood swings. Initially, I thought that I was the only one that was getting through very positive days and then very negative days. But once you start to share these emotions with other people, you understand that everyone is going through exactly the same. So yeah, that feels more solidarity out there. At the same time, though, I think what I personally stand for is this learning mindset. So I really try to learn from myself this time and turn to myself and see how I can make my life better, and that has to be relating only to me and not other people, because although you start to realize all this energy that you are giving to other people when you have so many interactions, which is great, of course, and everyone needs it, but once you step back from it, I think you now have all this energy and you have to direct towards yourself, and for some people that is very confrontational and difficult. And I think this is a very nice opportunity to do that and learn from yourself.
Thank you. Keep on learning. Peter Paul, please.
Yes, well,
enlighten us.
Maybe the same mix of very positive and also somewhat negative feeling. Maybe not too negative, actually. I realize that I'm totally privileged. So we have 4 children. We live in a very nice house. We have a garden. And to be honest, I enjoy the fact that all the kids are around here. Our oldest son is a student now, but he came back to Enschede because it was kind of lonely in his student house. And there's no trains and planes and the stress of who's going to take care of the children at what moment. So that concentration on family, I must say, I enjoy that, and I hope I can keep something of that after the crisis is over. On the other hand, I also am worried about the children. Our youngest is only 9-year-old, and he's totally fed up with digital school, and it's also for us a challenge to help him and to do our work. Our oldest son, as I said, first-year student. I mean, what's student life without the university, without having beers downtown? It's terrible. It's all digital, and so he doesn't have the experience of what it means to be a student. And I think that's really important. So I was also shocked to hear that some universities say, "Oh, we'll stay closed until February." Come on, this is the worst decision you could make. It's not only about learning things from your academic program. It's also about, well, learning lessons of life. And I think you can only learn that by meeting other people. So, and maybe the last thing for me personally, I also feel that the field that I'm in, the philosophy of technology, ethics of technology, is suddenly also quite visibly important in these times, where the discussions about Corona apps, about sustainability, about are we actually in a dress rehearsal for the environmental crisis at this moment, and all these issues suddenly are very important. And it also, well, is a consolation because it makes it also, it makes you feel that your work can also be meaningful for society, including the wonderful event that we are in now.
Thank you so much. I'm going to end it, and even though we have so many questions, as you can see in the chat that came in, but unfortunately, I don't want to take so much time from everybody, from the speakers, from the audience. I just want to show one, because we are a very open organization. Anonymous here says it would be nicer to rehearse beforehand, but I'm enjoying this experimental view as well. To be honest, and nobody will believe this, we actually rehearsed and everything worked. So I think it's a perfect synonym from the time that we are in. It seems to work, but that it doesn't. And I want to end with that. I want to thank all the speakers. Peter Verbeek, thank you so much for your amazing talk. Frank Kresin, you hear applause, of course. And Olina Terzi, and of course, on the phone, Theo Ploeg. My name is Marco van Hout. Please look us up on digitalsocietyschool.org or look us up through the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Thank you so much for today. Please keep on asking the questions on the Q&A because we are still able to answer them in a different way. We're going to be in touch with all of you, maybe with a few answers, maybe with a few questions back to you. Stay healthy, everybody, and not going away without my wish. Dear future.
Dear future. Dear future.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you very much.
Dear
Thank you.
future.
Thank you, Marco.
This is Dear Future, I'm ready.
Dear future, I'm ready.
Have an amazing evening, everybody.